Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Tim Booker channel. I hope you enjoy listening to books. The book I'm interpreting for you today is The Image, with a subtitle, A Guide to Pseudo-Events in America. What are pseudo-events? Let's start by citing a few examples from daily life. Have you ever noticed that some celebrities active on screens today are widely known, but if asked about their significant works, you might struggle to come up with anything? Or perhaps you've seen a viral spot on social media that looks like a paradise in photos but turns out to be quite ordinary and disappointing in person. Additionally, many news headlines are incredibly appealing, yet upon closer inspection, the stories inside, after much circling, turn out to be advertorials fabricated for brand promotion. At first glance, these phenomena may seem unrelated, but behind them lies a common trait, whether it's public figures, popular spots, or PR articles. Despite appearing in the media, they are all artificially created rather than naturally occurring. This type of information that appears in the media and is artificially synthesized is referred to as pseudo-events. This book was written in 1961, over 60 years ago. Are pseudo-events still prevalent in the media today? Let's not discuss gossip media but focus on heavyweight international media like the New York Times. In 2023, a research paper analyzed 70,370 reports from this newspaper between 1980 and 2019, finding a continuous rise in the proportion of pseudo-events. In today's news, over 30% of reports are pseudo-events. While the media's role is to report recently occurring events, pseudo-events featured in the media transform this role into manufacturing events that wouldn't naturally happen. The primary purpose of this book is to reveal the logic behind the creation of pseudo-events, prompting reflection on how these events influence our perception of the world. The author, Daniel J. Boorstin, is a renowned American historian who served as the Librarian of Congress for 12 years. His standing in the historical field is largely based on his The Americans trilogy, with The Democratic Experience winning the Pulitzer Prize, equivalent to the Oscars in journalism. Thus, his research is intricately connected to the media. In the field of communication studies, The Image holds a significant position, introducing the famous concept of pseudo-events in communication studies. It is considered a pioneering work in 20th-century cultural studies and has profoundly influenced subsequent classics, such as the well-known Amusing Ourselves to Death. Now, let's dive into the main content of the book in 3 parts. In the first part, we'll dissect the characteristics of pseudo-events outlined in the subtitle. Despite being proposed over 60 years ago, this concept still holds strong explanatory power for our current lives. In the second part, we'll delve into the main title, The Image. The author contends that the image revolution is the prime culprit behind the popularity of pseudo-events. Finally, I'd like to invite you to ponder how pseudo-events might negatively impact our understanding of the world and the organization of our lives. What can we do about it? First, let me systematically break down the concept of pseudo-events for you. In the book, Boorstin provides a concise definition: pseudo-events are artificially synthesized events. From this definition, we can extract 2 key words. Artificially synthesized implies that pseudo-events are intentionally created by people for a certain purpose, and events suggests that pseudo-events are not fabricated falsehoods but rather genuine replicas. Now, let me explain each aspect separately. Firstly, pseudo-events are artificially synthesized, not naturally occurring. Boorstin uses the distinction between heroes and celebrities to illustrate the difference between natural occurrence and artificial synthesis. Heroes, defined in the dictionary as individuals admired for their courage, nobility, or achievements, earn their greatness through their own qualities, often honed through challenging experiences like war. On the other hand, celebrities, according to Boorstin, are more like packaged personalities, with their fame built through continuous branding rather than substantial achievements. Applying this to today's celebrity industry reveals numerous corresponding examples. In simple terms, if heroes are naturally occurring, celebrities are artificially manufactured. Boorstin puts it poignantly in the book: heroes earn greatness through their efforts, while celebrities are adorned with greatness through the efforts of others. Since pseudo-events are artificially synthesized, a crucial question arises: why invest human and material resources in creating these events? Boorstin's answer is straightforward: for coverage or representation. In other words, those who craft pseudo-events do so with the expectation of widespread dissemination and profit. To illustrate this viewpoint, let me share a classic business case involving Phineas Taylor Barnum, a pioneer in modern public relations. Barnum, a genius at manufacturing pseudo-events, built the Barnum American Museum in New York to make a fortune. However, he struggled with the lack of impressive exhibits. Solution: he hired a stout man, paying him $1.50 a day, and named him Brick Man, signifying the brick in his hand. Brick Man's job was simple. Barnum gave him 5 bricks, placed 4 at specified locations around the museum, and had him carry the 5th brick in his hands. His task was to enthusiastically run from one brick to another, replacing the one in his hand each time. In less than half an hour, hundreds of people gathered at the museum entrance, curious about what was happening. This is a typical example of a pseudo-event. Although it successfully created the illusion of a crowded scene in front of the museum, Barnum effectively attracted attention to the museum. To summarize, the first characteristic of pseudo-events is that they are artificially created for the purpose of dissemination. Now, let's discuss the second characteristic. Pseudo-events are not false fabrications but genuine replicas. If you think pseudo-events are about deception, you may miss their most ingenious strategy. The distinction between fake news and pseudo-events lies in the fact that fake news is fabricated, while pseudo-events are manufactured. On one hand, pseudo-events reject falsity. They remain events that genuinely occurred. On the other hand, pseudo-events also reject submission to existing truths. They aim to be the masters of reality, creating new truths. Consequently, pseudo-events thrive on an ambiguous relationship with reality. Boorstin believes that this ambiguity is most vividly demonstrated in the field of advertising. He shares a story in the book about Claude Hopkins, a pioneer in the American advertising industry, who took on a contract to advertise Pabst beer. How did he approach this? After touring the brewery and realizing that steam was used to purify the beer bottles before filling, he had an inspiration. Hopkins devised a campaign highlighting the phrase "steam cleansed" to convey Pabst beer's purity. The ads were a success, propelling Pabst beer from the 5th to the 1st in national sales. The issue with this advertising campaign, however, was that while Pabst beer did undergo steam cleansing, virtually all beers at the time followed the same process. The campaign didn't lie, but it embellished a trivial truth. In today's business landscape, such advertising pseudo-events are not uncommon. For instance, an advertisement for mineral water may claim to be the nature's courier. This cleverly emphasizes its natural origin, but think about it, which brand of mineral water doesn't come from nature? Similarly, some cosmetics ads assert pure herbal essence, no chemical additives. Yet, consider this. Which component of herbal essence escapes the periodic table of chemical elements? The secret to the success of pseudo-events lies in the ambiguity of facts, creating replicas of truth. They don't require careful consideration. Instead, they hope you follow their logic and fulfill a self-fulfilling prophecy. Here, I'll briefly explain the term self-fulfilling prophecy, a psychological concept implying that our behavior towards others can influence their actions and ultimately impact their self-evaluation. Returning to the Pabst beer case, its goal was to continuously instill the concept of steam cleansing in consumers. Eventually, consumers, having heard it repeatedly, genuinely believed that Pabst beer possessed a unique sense of purity. In simpler terms, the essence of this trick is, say it long enough, and it becomes true. Reflecting on this, contemporary pop stars operate under the same logic of production. In the past, celebrities gained recognition because of their works. Nowadays, celebrities often become famous for being famous. This is a typical example of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Why do people remember many celebrities but struggle to recall their works? The reason is that although they may lack substantial works, they consistently generate various trivial pseudo-events through public relations, appearing in the media. Paradoxically, the term celebrity embodies a perfect synonymous loop. What people are most familiar with is that people are most familiar with. The end result is that even though they may not have significant works, they continue to be reported because they are already famous. Since they are so famous, we better join in appreciating and praising them together. Having discussed these points, I've explained the two characteristics of pseudo-events. On one hand, they are artificially synthesized for a specific purpose. On the other hand, they are, at best, genuine replicas of reality. However, another question naturally arises: have pseudo-events always existed, or did they become popular in the media later due to some external force? Borston's answer is the latter. Pseudo-events are a product driven by some force, the driving force behind it is the image revolution. According to Borston's analysis, the image revolution in human history roughly began in 1873 and concluded around 1941. The pivotal starting point was the advent of dry plate photography, signifying a shift for photographers from carrying darkroom tents outdoors to developing film at home, simplifying the process significantly. The symbolic endpoint was the widespread adoption of television in the United States. This meant that dynamic images entered people's homes, drastically reducing the cost of viewing images. So, what does the image revolution signify? On the surface, it implies a qualitative leap in humanity's ability to create, preserve, transmit, and publish clear images. This is easily understood. However, Borston believes that, at a deeper level, the image revolution changed people's expectations of the world. Here, we can borrow Neil Postman's perspective, the author of Amusing Ourselves to Death, to understand this statement. The age of text cultivated a public seeking rational speculation, while the age of images cultivated a public seeking sensory stimulation. In other words, people in the text era spent their days contemplating how to understand the world, whereas people in the image era spent their days figuring out how to see more vivid and unexpected landscapes in this world. However, a problem arises. On one hand, technology advances rapidly, on the other hand, the world continues to be full of events every day. Or in other words, our expectations of the world we want to see have surpassed what the world itself can provide. How to bridge this gap? This is where pseudo-events step in, announcing that they can take responsibility for providing various vivid and unexpected scenarios. Of course, this is the natural advantage of pseudo-events. They can make the world more dramatic, more communicative, satisfying the creator's personal purposes, and becoming the daily topic of conversation for consumers. Borston aptly summarizes this with a statement: the image revolution has turned American life into a showcase of images, a stage for pseudo-events. We can apply this logic to reconsider the cases we just discussed. For example, when we say that celebrities increasingly lack substantial works, it's because the production cycle of a classic work is lengthy, making it impossible to meet our constant expectations of the world. However, spreading a person's image, creating a pseudo-event around this image, is easy and fast. Plan it today, and it could make headlines tomorrow. Therefore, the image revolution has brought us methods to fabricate fame, and the speed of celebrity production has increased. They eventually became a group known for their fame rather than their works. We can also use this logic to understand today's tourism industry. You will find that the tourism industry is full of various pseudo-events spawned by the image revolution. Travel, initially meant to involve hardships to encounter unfamiliar things, was the same word as labor in Old English. However, today's travel is more like a pre-packaged dish diluted and falsified by various images. On one hand, travel is no longer about understanding local culture because, as Borston puts it, one of the functions of travel agencies is to prevent tourists from interacting with locals. The only things tourists can interact with are standard pseudo-events specially arranged for them, performed by locals. Borston tells an interesting story. Legend has it that in Berlin before World War I, when the Royal Military Band played at noon in front of the palace, Emperor Wilhelm, no matter what he was doing, would stop and say, "Gentlemen, please allow me to excuse myself, I must go to the window and show my face. You know, according to the travel guide, I'm supposed to be here at this time." So, what tourists see during travel may not be the living culture of the local people but specimens that have been pre-preserved and pre-treated by locals for the reception of tourists. On the other hand, through media images, our expectations for travel destinations are constantly elevated. Due to the limitations of the writing era, Borston's examples are mostly related to movies. For instance, he says that tourists, instead of seeking surprises, are more interested in satisfying their cliched impressions. They want to know if the Trevi Fountain in Rome really looks like it does in the movie Roman Holiday. Is Hong Kong truly like it appears in The Mood for Love? Of course, if you observe today's social media, you'll likely come across several so-called internet famous spots in your city. You might find these places quite ordinary, but on social media, they are dressed up as unknown and mystical wonders, such as top 10 amazing off-the-beaten-path spots known only to locals, as if waiting for the fortunate ones who see this post to embark on a solo adventure. In summary, according to Borston, pseudo-events are triggered by the image revolution with the purpose of filling our unrealistic expectations of the world. So, the next question to ask is, what impact does pseudo-events have on us? According to Borston, there are mainly two negative effects of pseudo-events. The first is that the pursuit of reputation has become the most crucial social competition. However, the competition is not about genuinely achieving success, instead, it involves providing various pseudo-events. Borston sarcastically remarks that any image of America offered by a cinema today, in terms of the number of people it can reach and the speed of dissemination, surpasses books in the American National Library that discuss American ideals. I believe this sarcasm is still relevant today. You'll notice that in today's competition for reputation, it is more important to perfect one's image than to perfect oneself. According to Borston, it means mistaking the shadow for oneself, focusing our thoughts on managing the shadow. More importantly, when pseudo-events become the most important channel for building reputation, media and pseudo-event creators may form a collusion. Politicians, advertisers, and public relations professionals rush to learn how to create pseudo-events, and in the end, the media foots the bill for these pseudo-events. To illustrate this collusion, Borston tells an interesting story in the book, featuring a character named Joseph McCarthy. Yes, the infamous instigator of McCarthyism. One crucial reason McCarthy wielded great influence in the American political arena in the 1950s was that he understood how to get himself into the news. The key was that even if he had nothing substantial to reveal to the media, he could still make headlines. How did he achieve this? By artificially creating pseudo-events. At that time, McCarthy introduced the so-called morning news conference, summoning reporters early in the morning to discuss what? You might find it laughable. The content was a preview of an afternoon news conference where shocking news would be announced. However, at the afternoon conference, he would most likely claim to have encountered some difficulties and needed more time to find a mysterious witness. You'll notice that even though McCarthy didn't say anything substantial, he made headlines twice by creating two pseudo-events. At this point, you might wonder, wouldn't reporters get annoyed with such antics? No, quite the opposite. Reporters were McCarthy's most powerful allies because both parties tacitly collaborated in creating pseudo-events. If pseudo-events are considered a political business, then reporters and McCarthy were just different segments of the supply chain in this business. The second negative impact of pseudo-events is what Borston calls the mirror effect. This term means that in an environment surrounded by pseudo-events, we think we see a larger and farther world, but in reality, we are just looking in the mirror, seeing only our own expectations. Let's return to the example of travel. We travel to witness another culture, to meet people living in another culture. However, contemporary travel tends to isolate tourists from locals. Much of what travel agencies offer to tourists are prefabricated pseudo-events. For instance, if you visit a village of a minority group, the locals may sing and dance not out of religious or ceremonial necessity but to satisfy the tourists, providing a replica. Consequently, instead of traveling to a distant place to see the other side of the world, travel becomes more like looking in the mirror, seeing the projections of our inner selves. Similarly, following this logic, the pseudo-events created by celebrities also cater to the projections in the hearts of fans. Fans don't gain any updated insights from witnessing these pseudo-events, they simply reinforce their internal expectations. Are they chasing after idols? Yes, but according to Borston's perspective, fans are also looking in the mirror and expecting this mirror to reflect their inner desires. Alright, this book concludes here, and let's review and summarize what we've discussed. We've divided our explanation of the concept of pseudo-events into three parts. In the first part, we talked about the two characteristics of pseudo-events. On the one hand, pseudo-events are intentionally created by people for a certain purpose, on the other hand, they are not fabricated falsehoods but rather genuine counterfeits. In the second part, I explained why pseudo-events become prevalent in the media. Borston believes that the most significant driver behind this is the image revolution. The image revolution significantly raised people's expectations of the world, and when the world fails to meet those expectations, pseudo-events step in to fill the gap between reality and expectations. In the third part, I introduced the two negative effects caused by pseudo-events. The first is that the pursuit of reputation has become the most crucial social competition, where various industries are busy perfecting their images rather than improving themselves. The second is the formation of a mirror effect. We think we are seeing a richer world, but in reality, we are continually circling within our expectations. So, to address the rampant reality of pseudo-events, what can we do? It must be admitted that eliminating pseudo-events is almost impossible. In my opinion, in this era, the most important way to combat pseudo-events is not to eliminate them but to ignore them. To be blunt, it's about not paying attention. Boorstin also mentioned in the book that although pseudo-events have tremendous power, they can only achieve their purpose with the cooperation of each one of us. Following this, he becomes quite stern in his words. Boorstin believes that each of us is an accomplice to pseudo-events. In our daily lives, we find ourselves surrounded by various trending topics, either a certain attraction becomes popular or a celebrity gets into trouble. Most of the colorful and popular news we see every day are pseudo-events, and most of them have little direct relevance to our lives. You can recall whether you've had the experience of hearing a piece of news from a source, like a friend, and then hurriedly searching for more details on social media, spending a lot of time on it. But looking back, does it seem important to you? Apparently not. Does not knowing this news affect your life? It seems not. Similarly, our attention to pseudo-events often stems from a kind of spiritual hunger, an irrational and indiscriminate expectation for the world. According to Boorstin, many of us live in such a dilemma, seemingly capable of satisfying our excessive expectations, to the point of forgetting how excessive those expectations are. From this perspective, in a world surrounded by pseudo-events, focusing on things that are genuinely important to ourselves, real ideas, becomes a scarce ability. This is where the value of attention management that we often emphasize comes in. Alright, that covers all the content I've introduced to you. Congratulations on completing another book. Thank you all for your support and attention. Please subscribe to the Tim Booker channel, like, and share this valuable knowledge with your friends. Let's combine wisdom with practice to achieve our financial goals and create a better future. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.